It's 6 a.m. here. I'm going to be taking a little walk around the village. And today I want to talk a bit about land. I don't profess to be an expert at this, and you learn a lot from living here in the village about all the ins and outs of land. It can be quite a dramatic affair, from arguments between neighbours, unclear boundaries, and some of the stories I'm going to share with you today also that include people being evicted, really, because there are different types of land. I'm not going to go through each one of them because it'd be a boring academic exercise to do that. You can look them up. But I guess all you really need to know is that there is Chanote land, which is registered land that has been surveyed and has all the proper documentation. And then there are various other kinds of land that actually cannot turn to Chanote until it's authorised by the government to do so. And some villages fight harder than others in order to get that done and to get that land properly recognised. Of course, the land becomes more valuable that way because it's got an actual recognition on a government level. But otherwise, a lot of the village land is actually owned by the government. And as you'll see in some of the stories later today, that land ends up, well, they're removed from the land in some cases. A lot of the land that make up Isan villages is agricultural land as well. And as for giving you a little bit of a history of land in a lot of the rural provinces, a lot of it was forest. I'm talking like 100 years ago now. It was forest, and people would just move into the forest, and then through generations they would work that land and farm that land. And then they have a sort of generational claim to the land, which in many cases is actually recorded in a ledger. It's all just kind of written on a ledger, like which family lives here and then who owns this section and who owns that section. Some of the villages here are lucky enough to be Chanote, but for those that are not, there's a lot of problems.
มันเป็นบางครอบครัวเป็นบางครอบครัวเขาทะเลาะกัน
เรื่องโอเคอันนี้ของใคร
สมัยก่อนไม่มีถนนเดิน
ไม่มีถนน
ใช่อันนี้เป็นที่ของยายที่ของแม่ของยายน่ะ
ครับ
ที่แม่ของแม่
ไม่มีไฟด้วยเหรอ
ไม่มีเขาเพิ่งเข้ามาตอนยายมาอยู่นี่แล้ว
ไม่มีไฟเลยพัฒนามาก
มาพัฒนาเองนั่นแหละอันนี้ถนนส่วนตัวนั่นเอง
Yeah, I was just saying there was never a road. We were just talking about the topic of land because obviously I get this information from somewhere. So there was in the history, in a long time ago, it was a bit of a wild west. Damo calls it a wild west. And from what I understand, there was a lot of internal fighting between families. And I'm talking about 100 years ago. And these are stories that I've heard from within the village here. And I'm not sure how much this compares to every other place in the world, but here, obviously, the initial settlers then have a claim to that land to some extent. It's not as black and white as people think it is. It's not just a case of, oh, there's some cheap land, let's buy it. Like I bought this piece here for 250,000 baht with the house on it, but I bought it from within a relative. So it's transferred from one relative to another on the ledger. This one's non-Chanote. So when it is turned to Chanote, I imagine that it would be of a higher value. Now, the funny thing about Chanote is there are multiple different villages waiting for Chanote, and they are always saying next year or in 2 years we're going to get the Chanote, and 3 or 4 or 5 years goes by and they still haven't got the Chanote. And it's just it's kind of a funny running joke, I guess, in rural villages that next year we're going to get the Chanote, or the Chanote's coming. The Chanote that never actually appears is coming, because of course people want that legal ownership of the land, and the land value could in some cases go up through having a Chanote. And so of course the other reason why it is important to have that Chanote and know the land boundaries and whatnot is because of inheritance. Where is the land passed from one generation to another? And then there's squabbling obviously between families of who actually has the ownership of the land. What we found is within our family, which is, I'm not just talking about Damo's direct family, but in the many families that live around here, there's usually one person in charge of that. In our case, it's Yai, and then she gives to each of the grandchildren a certain section of the land, and each of the children a section of the land. And so this is decided before her death, actually. And we're talking about 25 rai or something like that would be allocated to family members. And the other common one that many expats watching this as well will be aware of if you're living in rural Thailand is the arguments between the neighbours. So just before we continue with today's video, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our partner TapTap Send. Many of the people that watch this channel are either living overseas or they're planning to, but still have family and commitments based here in Thailand. And so as you can imagine, sending money back home here comes up a lot on the channel. TapTap Send is actually an app that allows you to transfer money to Thailand-based bank accounts from places like the UK, Europe, the USA, Australia and Canada. And the person receiving that money doesn't need to download any app or anything like that. It just goes straight into the Thai bank account. The great thing about TapTap Send is that there are no transfer fees. The exchange rates are very competitive, and most of the time the transfers will go through within just minutes. So transferring into Thailand is something that you do quite a lot. Those exchange rates and those fees can really add up. You might want to look into TapTap Send for a cheaper and better way to do it. If you would like to check it out, you can download TapTap Send from the App Store or Google Play. You can use my code word 20RURAL for your first transfer. And indeed, depending on where you're transferring from, users can get a bonus on that first transfer. You can check out the links below in the description and the pinned comment for more information. Highly recommend TapTap Send, because often, I have a bit of a perfect example here, people obviously build these fences around the land, and it is not unusual to encroach a few inches or sometimes a little bit more into either a public owned area or public used area or somebody else's land. And what then happens is bickering and squabbling between neighbours about where that boundary truly lies. And it can be as small as a few inches. It can make a problem, you know what I mean? It also decides who a certain tree may belong to or doesn't belong to. And so these boundaries become quite a big part of village life in ascertaining like whose area is whose. Some people may be familiar with the story in Pak Chong recently where some farmland actually overlapped land managed by the ALRO, that's the Agricultural Land Reform Office. So some local families had actually been working that land for years, but eventually they set some official boundaries on it, and disputes arose who actually had the rights to the land. In this case, they were facing eviction from that land, and they said for generations they had lived there and they'd worked that land, and so it belonged to them, whereas the Agricultural Land Reform Office said otherwise. Another thing that I'm also noticing, and having talked to some expats in Thailand that are really into the farming, is there's a compartmentalization of vast swathes of agricultural land. So what happens is when the mom and dad pass away and they leave all the children and the grandchildren a little parcel of land, each one ends up only getting like maybe a rye or two ryes, and to do any serious farming you need to have much more than that to do anything on a mass scale. So when that happens, the land ends up either being rented out, just seen as an asset to either rent out or sell. And so you have this compartmentalization of the farming land. This also affects the rice production in some cases, in some areas. You know, for the younger generations, just like anywhere else in the world, the younger generations aren't thinking about, I'll become a rice farmer, because they know damn well there's no money in it. For most people that are doing it the traditional way, they end up growing the rice and then the soil doesn't become fertile enough for the next season, and then you have to get expensive fertilizers in to refertilize the soil, and then you don't get a good harvest. It's diminishing returns, it goes on. So, and even if you do manage to get a good harvest and the rains don't wreck it or whatnot, the money is not fantastic. Now, saying this, I do have some subscribers that I know work with wife's family land and whatnot, and they do make good money out of it, but I imagine that the techniques that they're employing are very different from what I see around here, because the profits are minimal for the amount of work that's involved. And so a lot of young people are not thinking, oh, I'm going to live here in rural Thailand. They're thinking, well, how much is that land worth? How much can I get for that land to buy my new motorbike or a new car or something, you know? And so the land is often sold off. And I know this because I'm offered it all the time. So there's every couple of months, there's always like, do you want to buy this land? It's a good price, but I don't want to purchase any more land. Like, I bought a lot of land since I've been here. As I've mentioned on the vlog before, it's for for the kids. I see it as for the kids' future. But I think that's enough. I certainly don't want anything that is far away and that you can't keep an eye on. Oh, Sir Kai. Okay. Oh, my sir. She's just offering me to buy that log there. I don't know, guys. It is funny. And to be fair, with all the building that we've done, I have bought a lot of wood over the years. So, but I don't want to buy that piece of wood. It's just trying to sell me. Now, some may have heard about the areas around Tapland National Park. Some of the families there, they say they and their parents farmed the land for generations, and then later the national park boundaries were formally mapped and enforced. And then some of the farmland ended up as classified protected forests, and the residents faced legal cases, eviction pressure, and actually enforcement action. The villagers say that they were there before the park boundary and that their families actually cleared that farmland long ago, but the authorities say the land is legally protected forest, and so encroachment laws apply regardless of the length of occupation. He's actually selling barbecues at the back there. It says "Laka Pisit," I mean special price for the barbecues. So you get a lot of that in the villages as well. People that are coming on through selling watermelons, selling vegetables and whatnot. That's how they make a living. Selling coconut ice cream. You know, it's very entrepreneurial here. People find a way, and they've always got something to sell. Now, I guess the final point on this as well is how land changes hands between families here. I've touched on it before, but when one member of a larger family gets short on cash, they will offer another part of the family, like, you buy this land from us, but could we buy it back from you in 2 years? Or will you keep it the same price for us for a certain length of time? And because they need the cash, they need the liquidity, and they don't want to go to the bank. The first point of call is the family. If a family member can buy it from them temporarily and they buy it back, and to be honest, guys, they very rarely ever buy it back because the money runs out. Where they're going to get that kind of capital from again? There's also drunken uncle land, as I call it, and there's been a few cases here in our village where, this was before I arrived here, where the drunken uncle just needed to feed the beer habit and ended up selling land for ridiculous prices. This is to what do you have? Blue pack today, Shima. Fact Tonga. Planting his pumpkins. Yeah, so where was I? Drunken uncle land. So Damo's sister that lives in Germany, she had a drunken uncle here at one point, and he basically sold her, I think it was a rye for under 30,000 baht, which, to be honest, it was like 17 years ago, so it wasn't that bad a deal, but it's a pretty bad deal if you think about it now, because the same rye is probably worth 300,000. So it's 10x'd, you know, in those 17 years. So these are the intricacies, I guess, of village land. I don't profess to know all of the ins and outs. I'm sure my subscribers have got some stories for you below. They always have. I always find it entertaining, my comment section. I didn't want to make this a vlog about foreigners buying land or anything like that. This is something more of an insight into the way land boundaries are an issue here. You never know how it's all going to work out. Governments can make big decisions that end up impacting people's long-term wealth and prosperity in their family. And that's why, as I always say on this channel, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Have a nice day, guys.